Okay, so picture this. You're at a church service.
Okay.
It's Father's Day,
Right.
and the pastor asks all the fathers to stand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'd think you'd see just, dads, right?
Right.
But then a whole group of women stands up too,
Wow.
and they identify as the fathers in their families.
Interesting.
And this really unexpected scene is actually described in the book we're looking at today, Your Father's Daughter, by Father Mark Noir.
It's such a powerful image.
Isn't it?
Challenging those traditional ideas we have about fatherhood, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's totally unexpected.
And it really makes you think about father absence, especially in Kenya, which is where this book is focused.
Yeah, it really makes it hit home
It does.
that this is a global issue.
And it got me thinking about how I even define fatherhood.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things you think you understand,
Right.
but then you read something like this and you're like, wait a minute, maybe I don't have it all figured out. What does this actually mean?
Exactly. And it's something that most people probably haven't considered very deeply before.
Yeah, and I think it's important for our listeners to know what we're doing today.
Okay.
Our mission for this deep dive is to go beyond just, a dictionary definition of fatherhood.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to explore what happens when it's absent,
Right.
how that impacts us,
Especially daughters.
especially daughters.
Yeah, and it's not just like a surface level thing.
Right.
This book that we're looking at, it really goes deep,
It does.
looking at the societal and psychological factors.
Yeah.
And it uses a lot of real-life examples to really highlight these global issues.
And they're from Kenya, which is interesting.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
really interesting to see these issues through that lens.
It's like holding a mirror up to society.
It really is.
Like everything you thought you knew about family, about fathers, about roles.
It makes you question it all,
Yeah.
which is a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like sometimes we need that shake-up
We do.
to make us really think about these things.
Yeah, and it starts with a simple question, what is fatherhood?
Right.
And I think a lot of people just go to that stereotype.
The provider,
The provider,
the
exactly.
one who brings home the bacon.
Yeah, but it's so much more than that.
It really is. And that's something this book drives home.
It does. And my dad was, that strong, silent type. He wasn't big on showing emotions,
Yeah.
but the way he showed his love was through his actions.
I see.
He was always working to provide for us.
Sure.
And reading this book, it made me realize that, even with its limitations, his way of being a father really impacted me.
Yeah.
My work ethic, my self-reliance.
Right. It all stems from that example that he set.
It does.
And I think that's a good example of how, no matter what form it takes, fatherhood leaves a mark.
For sure.
But what's interesting is this book challenges us to look beyond just being physically there or not.
Okay.
It makes us consider all the ways fatherhood can be absent.
Because it's not always physical, right?
Exactly. Sometimes it's psychological or emotional.
It's like a spectrum of absence.
That's a great way to put it.
And the book talks about this. There's fathers who are absent and unknown.
Right.
Absent and undisclosed.
Which can be really tough.
Even deceased fathers.
Yeah, the impact is still felt even then.
And one of the examples the book gives is this idea that some kids, especially those with absent and unknown fathers,
Mm-hmm.
they learn that hard, it's better not to ask.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
It is, and you can't help but think about how that silence impacts them.
And the lack of closure.
Exactly, because it's not even about the father who isn't there. It's about what that absence creates in the people that are left behind.
Absolutely, that void.
Yes.
And that void often gets filled,
Yep,
right?
So.
Well, the book talks about this phenomenon called the fantasy father.
Okay.
So these kids who are starved for information about their dads, they create these idealized images in their heads.
Oh, yeah, that really resonated with me when I read that. The book had this one example. This woman remembers attributing everything good about herself to this made-up version of her father.
Wow.
She'd say things like, oh, I got my intelligence from my dad, even though she knew nothing about him.
It's a coping mechanism
It is.
to make sense of that void.
But those fantasies, they're not based in reality.
Exactly. And they can have a lasting impact
It's on how they view themselves.
on their sense of self,
Wow.
on their relationships.
And the book focuses on Kenya.
It uses Kenya as like a case study
Yeah.
to explore these causes of father absence in a specific cultural context.
And I remember reading the statistics about Kenya.
They're pretty startling.
Yeah. Since 1970, single parenting in Kenya has tripled.
And, it's even gotten to the point where President Kenyatta himself has addressed it.
Wow.
He called it a threat to the very fabric of the Kenyan family.
Wow. That's That's a pretty powerful statement.
It really is, but it shows you how urgent this issue is.
Yeah, it does.
And while the book lists a lot of universal factors like divorce migration,
Right, those make sense.
it also looks at causes that are unique to Kenya.
Okay, like what?
Well, this one that really stood out to me was this whole concept of fathers as ATMs.
Fathers as ATMs.
Yeah, like their only worth is measured by their ability to provide financially.
So it reduces fatherhood to just money.
Basically.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the kind of consequences that has.
So it's not even enough to be physically present.
Yeah.
You have to be emotionally present, too.
Exactly. Engaged.
That's really interesting.
And then there's this whole issue of bride prices.
Okay.
So in some parts of Kenya, the tradition of paying a bride price has become so inflated
Wow.
that it's actually pushing men away from getting married and being fathers.
Because they can't afford it.
Exactly. It creates this economic barrier.
It's interesting how these traditions that are probably meant to bring families together
Right.
are actually doing the opposite.
It's really ironic when you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
And then there's the whole HIV/AIDS epidemic,
Right.
which has had a devastating impact on families.
So many children without fathers.
Exactly.
And it makes you realize that it's not just one thing. It's
Yeah.
economics, it's society, it's public health.
It's all interconnected.
It all impacts fatherhood.
Absolutely.
What about the impact on daughters specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention daughters
Okay.
because there's this kind of pervasive myth out there
Mm-hmm.
that father absence affects sons more.
Yeah, like boys are more vulnerable without a dad.
Right, exactly.
Makes sense.
But this book really challenges that.
It does.
Yeah, it doesn't say that sons don't struggle,
Okay.
but it really shines a light on how father absence uniquely affects daughters.
And it backs it up with research.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of research cited.
Okay, so why is that? Why is it so impactful for daughters?
So the book talks about this theory called self-in-relation.
Self-in-relation.
And it basically says that women tend to develop their identities through relationships more than men do.
So their sense of self is more connected to their relationships with others?
Exactly.
I can see that.
You know, daughters, they learn about themselves,
Mm-hmm.
their worth, their place in the world, through how they interact with their fathers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So when that's missing,
Right?
it can really mess with their sense of self,
And there are other relationships too.
especially romantic relations.
So I think that one example in the book
Which one?
about the woman who had trouble setting boundaries in her relationships. And she realized it was because she was always seeking validation from men.
Because she never got it from her dad.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a perfect example of how this plays out in real life.
It is.
And it's not to say that men don't go through similar things.
Right, of course.
But for daughters,
Yeah.
especially with all the societal expectations placed on them,
It's a lot.
it can be really tough.
And this kind of goes against that idea that men are raised to be independent.
Totally.
Like they're supposed to just deal with it and move on.
Right, compartmentalized.
While women are raised to be more relational. So let's talk about that impact.
Okay.
What are we talking about here?
Cool.
What are some of the ways that this absence shows up in the lives of daughters?
Yeah.
And I know we talked about resilience,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to be real about the challenges too.
Absolutely. And the book doesn't shy away from that.
Good.
One that really stood out to me was this idea of superwoman syndrome.
Superwoman syndrome.
Yeah, these women feel this intense pressure to overcompensate.
For the missing father figure?
In a way, I mean, they've learned to rely on themselves
Right.
to fill in the gaps.
So they become super self-sufficient.
Exactly. They take on too much responsibility.
Too much emotional labor.
All of it.
The book gave that example of the woman who became the emotional caretaker of her siblings after her dad left.
Yeah, it's like they're forced to grow up too fast.
It's a lot for anyone to handle.
It really is.
And then there's the societal stigma,
Oh, yeah.
especially in a place like Kenya.
Right. The book really highlights that.
What do you mean?
Well, in many cultures,
Mm.
including Kenya,
Yeah.
fatherless daughters are seen as less worthy of marriage.
Yeah, wow.
It's like they're punished for something that's not even their fault.
That's awful.
It is, and it's heartbreaking.
And it reminded me of that phrase from the book, "Where's my daddy?"
Oh, yeah. That one really gets you.
It does. It's like that longing never really goes away.
It stays with them.
Yeah.
But, the
Yeah,
book doesn't just focus on the negative.
That's good, I was going to say.
It celebrates the resilience of these women.
Because they are incredibly resilient.
They are. They have to be.
And it's important to remember that this doesn't define them. It's
Exactly.
not like a life sentence.
Not at all.
So how does that resilience show up?
In so many ways. I
Give
mean,
me an example.
for one, many of these women develop incredible survival skills.
Right, because they've had to figure things out on their own.
Exactly.
Wow.
Makes them resourceful, independent.
Strong.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of them turn their pain into purpose.
Oh, yeah. The book talks about women who dedicate their lives to helping other fatherless children.
It's amazing how they take their experiences and make something positive out of them.
It's truly inspiring.
It is.
And it shows that healing and growth are possible.
But how do you get there? It feels like we've covered so much
We really have.
about father absence and its impact on daughters.
But there's still so much more to say about healing and growth.
Yeah, and that's what I keep coming back to, that
Mhm.
feeling of hope. Because it would be easy to walk away from this feeling kind of down.
Right, like what can you even do?
Yeah, but this book doesn't leave you hanging.
No, not at all.
So what does it say?
Well, it gives you some really practical strategies to move forward.
Okay, like what?
And it all starts with realizing that this doesn't have to define you.
You mean father absence.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
It's about how you choose to move forward.
Not erasing the past, but choosing how to move on from it.
Exactly.
I like that.
And one of the best things you can do is therapy. Not just any therapy, though.
What do you mean?
You need to find someone who really gets it.
Who specializes in father absence.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Because it gives you that safe space to process everything.
Yeah, to really unpack those feelings.
And there's support groups, too.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
where you can connect with other people who get it.
Right, because you're not alone in this.
Not at all. And there's something so powerful about that.
There really is.
Knowing that other people understand what you're going through.
Exactly. And the book also talks about positive male role models,
Okay.
surrounding yourself with good men.
Like mentors and uncles.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even grandfathers.
Anyone who can provide that positive male influence.
So it does take a village.
It really does.
What about advice for mothers?
Oh, yeah. There's some great stuff for moms in there, too.
Like what?
Well, for one, Father Mark talks about how important it is not to badmouth the absent father.
Oh, wow. Even if it's tempting.
Especially then, because as hard as it is, you have to remember that it impacts the child, too. Right? They internalize that.
Exactly. So it's about protecting them.
Even if you're hurting.
Yeah, and on a more practical level, the book encourages mothers to connect their kids with other positive male role models.
Like we were just talking about.
Yeah, uncles, grandfathers, mentors, anyone who can provide that support.
Because it really does take a village.
It does, and the book ends on such a powerful note.
Tell me.
It talks about positive self-talk.
Oh, right. The affirmations.
Yeah, like that one, you are not the rejected one. You're the one who broke free.
It's so powerful.
Isn't it?
It's like you're taking back your story.
Exactly.
Refusing to let this define you.
And the book goes even further.
How so?
It has these affirmations that are almost about radical forgiveness.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, this one really got me. Thank you for not being there for me when I needed you most.
Wow, that's intense.
I know it's a lot to take in.
It is, but there's also something really powerful about it.
Right.
Like acknowledging the pain, but choosing to move on.
With gratitude.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I think that's what makes this book so important.
It's challenging,
It is,
but in a good way.
definitely. It makes you think differently
About fatherhood,
about absence.
about everything.
And it reminds us that these aren't just statistics.
Right.
These are real people's lives.
And their stories are filled with pain,
And resilience.
heartbreak, and hope.
Yes, and it's that hope that I want to leave you with today.
Me too, because even in the face of father absence, healing is possible,
Absolutely.
and a brighter future is out there.
It really is.
You just have to reach for it.